Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Sleeping Barber podcast. We're excited to have Mary Kyriakidi, a global thought leader at Kantar and longtime friend of the show, join us once again. Mary will be sharing her insights on modern marketing dilemmas based on a series of articles she recently wrote. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Well, we have an amazing guest for you today. It's Mary Kyriakidi. Mary, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here. Nice to see you both.
Yes,
nice to see you here, Vasily, as well. Yeah, I'm excited too.
Carlos Sori says, Mary.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
There's two Greeks. There it
it's
is.
all Greek to me.
That's it, right?
That's my joke. I've been waiting to say that.
We should have the whole thing in Greek, you know? Maybe not that many people will listen to it, but
no, probably not.
Yeah.
So good.
I can say Yiro and Saganaki and Opa.
There it is.
Okay.
That's
so you
the
make
extent of my
us
Greek.
want to eat and dance effectively, but yeah, okay.
You don't want to see me dance. It's not
Zebekiko or whatever. Any other time.
Well, anyway, so Mary, we're excited to have you here for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, we're going to talk about branding and the consumer decision journey. You've written a couple articles, a whole series of articles over this last year.
Yes.
And we wanted to kind of explore two of them specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But you were our first guest on the show last year, and so we're excited to have you back.
Great.
This is really awesome. And then just for reference, for people who are listening, you're a global thought leader at Kantar, formerly the VP of Business Development and Brand Development and Brand Insight. You have an MSc in Gender and Media, which we talked about a little bit before last time at London School of Economics and Political Science. So we're really excited to have you back. And to start with, you had a wish for marketers last year. You're talking about one of the things as a takeaway you hope people got out of 2022. Can you just talk a little bit about that wish and just talk about how your wish went?
My wish was to get consensus, right? Because I suspect that's what it was. I always wish for that. And I'm the eternal optimist. So I don't know, actually. Let's think about the answer. But in a way, the modern marketing dilemmas aim to do exactly that. We tackled a number of themes where people disagree. Many of these themes have, for decades, polarized marketers. And so we tackled them, and we tried to be impartial in the creation process. We brought opposing views in. It's quite important. We did some more research. Our R&D was feeding in throughout, and we retested hypotheses. So it was every single one of those articles had themes, had a lot of data, a lot of new data behind it. So I've done my bit, with an array of scientists behind me. But to be honest, I don't think we're quite there yet. As in terms of the industry consensus, we haven't reached it yet. And I suppose this is the adjective maybe to highlight, yet.
Yeah, and so a couple of those modern marketing dilemma articles we're going to talk more about are the role that brand has in consumer decision journey, and then performance branding, which in some cases sounds like an oxymoron to people, because we always talk about performance advertising being like low funnel, but now we're talking about performance branding. So there's a lot of things in those that we want to dig into. So really excited to have you here.
Thank you.
In terms of the consensus about driving growth, I think generally there's probably a consensus around mental and physical availability being key fundamental components of driving growth. Would you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
There is
Okay,
there's a
so we're
fair
off to a
amount.
good start.
We're off to a great start. Here we go.
That's true, actually. Yes, you're right.
We have consensus.
Yes, we're
Among
getting
three.
there. We didn't start with a disagreement. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
fair amount of magic that happens when mental and physical availability overlap, and that magic translates into a sale. There's revenue comes in, a sale is made, but that's all for now. That's all for the present, right? And if you're looking beyond a year's horizon, you've got to think about sustainable growth. You've got to think about the type of growth where, you know, it's with stronger roots, and it comes with longer term benefits. And I suppose if I was to disagree, I would disagree with that in mind. I do believe that it's a magical moment, but it's for now. We've done a lot of research to understand what triggers consumers to make decisions. We tried to deconstruct that decision journey process, and it's in one of the articles that probably brought us together again. What's the title of it? Yes, the role that brand plays in the
Brand plays in consumer decision journey. Yeah, and so in relation to the triggers, maybe you can talk a little bit about that and the research that you guys have done on triggers.
Yes, we've identified 3 stages. There's a beautiful pie chart there. It's the donut, rather, actually. It is. So consumers are, in all these 3 stages, consumers are under the influence of some kind of persuasion. And then if you flip this on its head, we did that because we wanted to frame our advice to marketers. So we're saying to them, so you should pay attention to these 3 facets of the consumer decision journey, because if you do, then you will realize our studies show a phenomenal 46% growth. But not all stages play the same role. You see, that's the beauty of it. There we have equity there, we have experience there, we have activation there. But what we have found out is that equity plays the most crucial role. And if you have equity, you will trigger future sales. Your investors will relish the intangible value of your brand, and give it a generous market capitalization, because they know that sales and profit come from future buyers. So that's why I suppose equity plays such an important role. It's those positive perceptions in the minds of every buyer, not just the ones who are currently in there to buy now, but also the ones who are light buyers now and will be buyers in the future. That's why it's the most important driver of growth. But you know, the now is very important too, and it's very important for current sales. And this is what we call, I mean, everyone calls it activation, but in this specific donut chart, we call it the activation phase, because people who find themselves in the moment of buying, you know, whether it's an impulse buy, or whether they go to the supermarket with their post-it note and they know exactly what to buy, they will be able to easily identify a brand that they associated with a need. Now, you know, they will reach for the product on the shelf, whether it's physical or digital shelf. So that's why activation is really important. That magic where a sale is made right now, and then I suppose the third one is experience. Experience is also very important because it triggers repeat sales, and it all comes back to the to brand purchasing being like a leaky bucket, right? A lot goes out the bottom, and if you only try to limit defection to reduce that churn, then you will set limits on your future growth, on your company's growth. But if you think like a plumber, you know, if you follow simple plumbing economics. The less that goes out the bottom, the less you have to put back in. And to switch back to plumbing to marketing, the less people you lose, the more likely you will be to grow by penetration gain.
Mm-hmm.
So these three facets, these three stages, we've identified when we deconstructed the consumer decision journey. And this is our advice to marketers. Do those three, and future growth will find you. Or you will find it, actually.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So when we think about the three stages then, and through the customer lens, if you will, and you mentioned that equity is probably one that has the largest. I just wanted to get a sense of idea here in terms of the other two stages, or I guess in total, what do they have an equal value to the customer, or are they, again, kind of like skewed in one of the three stages more? What does that relationship look like?
So the overall the contribution is it adds up to a 47%.
Okay.
The experience triggers repeat sales. It can yield 70% growth. This is what but I should say actually at this point that we shouldn't just think of experience as something that is only important to service brands. It's the consumers.
Okay.
Packaged goods, the FMCG products can also create a sense of experience they offer through their marketing. It's for all products and services. Yes.
Right.
When you're talking about equity, it's such a big word, but for the first time, I had this idea pop in my head where equity in my mind is almost like annual recurring revenue. Like there's an expectation that you're going to, in consumer packaged goods, let's say, or in regular retail or something like that, you don't have a guarantee for future purchases, but brand equities gives you an idea, similar in B2B, where you've got, let's say, a SaaS product, and you have subscription model. Your annual recurring revenue is kind of like part of what's driving the equity in that brand.
Yes.
And I think what you're saying in terms of equity on, say, the CPG or the business consumer side is that the larger your equity, the more likely people are to choose you in the future. And so it provides a sort of assurance or comfort that the company is going to be successful in the long term, not just today because we had a big sale. Is
Correct.
that fair?
Correct. The more people are predisposed to your brand, the more likely they are to reach out for you on the shelf. Again, digital or physical, now and in the future. Yes. That's exactly what we're saying.
Okay. Okay. In terms of the model, like there's even, so this is another area potentially where there's a lot of disagreement and maybe unalignment.
Let's see.
Like you guys have, it's an interesting model, like thinking about equity, help me out with the sections again, experience and then activation. So those are important parts. In my mind, as you were saying, that it kind of relates to equity as almost the mental component. The experience is a little bit of the physical component / digital. And then activation is maybe a lever that you have to pull to bring in sales today. If I'm understanding that correctly.
You understand.
But that's a model. But then there's also other models like the sales funnel. We were talking about leaky buckets, and then we're like ADA, and then we're talking about there's consumer decision journey. I mean, there's all these different models that exist out there. And is there a way to kind of think about these things so they're not totally different from one another and that we're not arguing over the models, you think?
The potentially is. So in the I think I tried to compare the donut to the funnel, and the equity part of the donut reflects the upper part of the funnel, and then the other two, as you very well said, is linked, is mirrored against the bottom part of the funnel, and you're right. I mean, everyone has got their own models. And in everything that we do, MDF, I'm sure it will come up, the meaningfully different framework is behind it. And we're
Right.
not, we're passionate about it because it's, we've done a lot of research, and a lot of brain power has gone into this, and we tested and retested our theories. But we're not pushing anyone, maybe a general push towards it specifically. If somebody comes to us and goes, oh well, actually I want to use the funnel instead, and let's talk about consideration, let's talk about awareness, let's talk about purchase, and forget about that. We're not objecting to it. I think one of the things to remember about marketing is that it's beautiful because it's imperfect. I mean, I would say that for every finding, there's potentially an example that falsifies it, and none of the data truths are absolute. I mean, they can't be, because the things that we're looking at are intrinsically different to generate rules from. But there's a certain beauty in something being imperfect, and new data validations don't necessarily invalidate existing truth. They just prove that another path exists too, and this is where we stand on that. But it's a pretty good model because it's been tested and it worked with clients, always with clients of ours.
Yeah.
I love what you said there, that marketing is beautiful because it's imperfect. I think that's it's a unique way to think, because I think as marketers, everyone really tries to find their sandboxes and really kind of lean on, either, what consumer decision journey and whatnot. But the reality is you can, adapt it and adopt it the way you need in the moment for your product, service, etc. So I think that there's not very many other disciplines in business that have that kind of flexibility as marketing does. So I think that's a really nice way of putting that.
Thank you.
In terms of mental availability, I just want to come back to that for a minute, because I think we were just talking about this beforehand. I'm starting to play guitar and in bands and whatnot, and so I think about music a lot lately, more than ever. And in blues, there's this call and response thing. And I think about, one person says something and then the audience responds back. And that's kind of the call and response that happens in music. And I think about ads the same way. And then, so an ad is like the call and the response is the customer feedback, let's say, to that ad, or, reviews and so on and so forth. And so ads I think of as sort of setting a promise, and then creating an expectation in the minds of a consumer, and then the actual experience of purchasing the product, it kind of validates or what's the opposite of validate? Contradicts the promise. Yeah. And so in my mind, kind of brand building is a little bit about bringing those two things together as close as you can. So you say something and then the customer experiences it and they go, yeah, that was 100% accurate. Right. Or if it's really far apart and you go, that's terrible, everything they say is a lie. So then the ads just amplify their own truth as opposed to whatever it is they're saying.
Yes. Go on.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, I don't know if that's crazy or if it's just something like, is there any kind of validity to that idea and how you guys think about
it's
experience
not
of customer brands?
I think I think actually what you say couldn't be more true. I mean, we have found in our research that only 25% of brand building comes from paid media. And within that, for instance, less than 10 is TV ads. So 25% of brand building comes from paid media. Now, the remaining pretty big chunk of 3/4 comes from experiential touch points. So think about it, it's huge, right? So the experiential touch points like product and service experiences or word of mouth, they contribute up to 70%, 75% of a brand's equity. It's a pretty big number, and that element of trust that you mentioned is quite important if you want to succeed in that 75% space. So a large part of it does indeed come from meeting expectations and building trust, because
Mm-hmm.
as trust scores increase,
Mm-hmm.
so will the average brand value. And the more you're trusted by your customers, the more your brand is worth. It's about fulfilling a promise. It's about trust. It's a trust exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's incredible, because I never thought of, we all understand like brand is a responsibility essentially of the entire organization. When you think about, various departments that have equal,
Mm-hmm.
maybe equals, maybe not the right word, but they have a responsibility to the brand of itself. Marketing at the same time probably gets, and maybe this is, maybe there's an overgeneralization, but sometimes gets like the blunt end of the stick, because it's like marketing's responsibility to drive brand, when it's an organization's responsibility to really drive brand. So when I think about, how important experience design is in building brands, and I'd love to hear your take on this, how do you see that actually coexisting or living more holistically in organizations? Yeah.
I mean, they've got to get involved in that, because it's it's got to overlap. I mean, it's there's no point in designing, let's say, the best experience if it's not going to be profitable, or if it doesn't resonate, it doesn't convey it well. And you've got to understand if you are exceeding or falling short of your customers' expectations.
Yeah.
And I would say, I would go as far as to say that such an insight of whether you are creating an overlap there could potentially turn a crisis around, or could potentially even turn that crisis into an opportunity. We talked about magic before, and there is a lot of magic, a lot of magical moments in marketing, and there is a certain magic that happens here too, when consumers' experience overlap with their expectations. So those expectations are effectively based on a brand's promise, right? So the two things have to be in sync.
I just, as you're saying that, I was flashing back. You're just saying magic, and I was flashing back to the Magic Kingdom. So Disney World, and we went there over the Christmas break, and it was the
A
worst
different type of
fucking
magic.
experience I've had.
Well, yes, if you link
So
to
bad.
yes.
It was just like awful, and
Oh,
it was. And then, but I was like, I kept saying to people, I was using their own tagline, "The happiest place on earth," or whatever that line is, to say how I even said to Devi, I think, like, this is definitely not the happiest place on earth. Like, everyone was miserable. Lineups
dear.
galore, nowhere to sit. Like, it was off. Like, it was just horrible.
What did your
This is
kids
how the
think?
kids feel as well. This is how they're
Exactly.
feeling.
Hated it until they got off the ride. They're like, that was so fun. Let's go to the next one. And then we would like wait in a 2-hour lineup. And then this happened once. We got into a 2-hour lineup, and we got to the very front of the line. And then all of a sudden they canceled they had to shut down the ride, and they had to kick everyone off. And so the girls were just in tears, absolutely devastated, because it was supposed to be our last ride of the day. We just waited 2 hours for this. I mean, wait for
Terrible. I hear you can pay more to get at the very front of the line, maybe.
Well, no, we can. Sorry, what? We complain more.
You can pay more. I think.
Oh, yeah. We did. Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we did. And then when it got to the front, then it just they
dear.
shut it down.
That's even worse then.
Yeah, but it's kind of like that brand experience and the magic you were talking about. Like, had it been an incredible experience, it might have just been us, and maybe it was a bad day, but it was not. And there's like people wearing shirts like, I grew this beard in the lineup at Disney. Like, Disney, most expensive day ever. So it's one of those things though, but like they create this expectation, and then you have this experience. And I mean, for some people it probably is the most magical place on earth, and other times, like in my scenario, like it just, all those messages and all ads now are going to amplify every time I think of that experience, no matter what they say there in their ads. That experience is going to trump any kind of messaging that they
That's true.
Yes, I mean the overlapping scenario is magical. It's the dream scenario, but there's also your scenario, the nightmare scenario, where there's a gap.
Yeah.
The reality is, though, even that example, Mark, I think, every time someone will prompt you or you're in a discussion around Disney, you will probably go back to your experience, which is
Mhm.
now your truth, and you
Mhm.
will emanate that to as a story to those that potentially inquire, hey, what was that like? Should we do it? Should we not do it?
Mhm.
So it's kind of interesting, but the reality is now you've already been, I don't want to use the word tainted, but
Mhm.
kind of like you've had a bad experience, so you're not going to speak about Disney in a real positive light.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's, anyways, I think it's an interesting, and that's a
But
reality though.
yeah. Well, it comes back to what you were saying earlier, Mary, too, about experience making such a big difference for any company. It's not just Disney, but
Exactly.
Mhm.
we don't
Mm.
often think about like our own companies like Disney, but you go to a counter to buy or try and find a pair of shoes at a
Yeah.
store, or
Mm.
like that's part of the experience. Going to a restaurant, ordering, a dinner with your family, like that's an experience. And so we don't always think about Disney-like experiences for companies, but when we all have them, then you can design brand elements to be memorable, different, distinctive.
Yes. Even loyalty schemes are now being created as experiences, or there is the attempt to do so anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't get a flaming saganaki from a Greek restaurant, I'm sorry, I'm walking out.
Right?
It's a bad experience.
Yeah, everyone gets super excited. That's one of the most exciting
I
meals going.
I want,
Flames and
yeah. I want to get the fruit and the dessert in the end for free as a, this is our specialty,
Yeah.
as they say. And it just gives you that homely feeling. It's part of the Greek
Totally.
experience. It feels that
Yeah.
some still do, but some don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, in relation to differentiation, we were just talking about this. Like you can have companies, or even Greek restaurants, that all have the same kind of service or menu, or shoes, or products that they sell, cars, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. Can brands sell the same product but win by differentiating the customer experience? Like, is there any research you guys have seen there, or done
Yes.
research there, or found examples?
Yeah, we've been thinking about it a lot actually, and we present it as a virtuous cycle. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we present it as a symbolic relationship between experiences and expectations. We actually often say that experiences and expectations are the happy bedfellows of brand building,
Hmm.
and there are two arrows on the cycle. Our experiences are feeding our expectations, and then equally on the other side, our expectations are framing our experiences. So,
Hmm.
so for the first bit, with the experiences that are feeding into our expectations, our brand memories, the inspiration there was Daniel Kahneman's, the father of System
Mm-hmm.
1, System 2,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, he talks in his TED talk that it's the riddle of experience versus memory. He talks
Mm-hmm.
about the relationship between experience and memory, and he talks about the fact that we don't actually choose between experiences. He says we choose between memories of experiences. So,
Mm-hmm.
to your point about Disneyland, you might have an overall bad experience, but I think if you ask your kid, or if you ask a younger person who enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
the ride too much, they will be thinking about the memory of that experience
The
rather
fun
than
part.
the
Yeah.
overall experience. Yes, they will forget about the cues when they describe it. Maybe to their friends, they will talk about the peaks, the highlights of that experience, and so thinking as a marketer and taking into consideration that theory, Kahneman's theory,
Mm-hmm.
what we ought to be influencing is how experiences are remembered,
Mm-hmm.
for that part of the cycle, the feeding side of our cycle. But there's also the
Mm-hmm.
framing side. The framing side, so brand expectations can frame an experience, and they can influence our experience. So this I think it sounds like almost like unreasonable, but we can affect what someone thinks about a product or service if they try it first.
Mm-hmm.
And I have proof of that. I mean, the company does. There is so he's no longer there. So Andy Farr, a few decades ago, and I say that, I mean, it sounds like a long time ago, but you see how good it is, and it's still valid. So he ran several tests looking at what happens to someone's attitudes and intent towards a brand when they try a product versus when they see an ad about a product, or maybe they do the combination of the two. So he tackled it from different angles. So he had different samples that had those different experiences, and some were trying the actual product, some were seeing a good ad for it, some were experiencing both. And I'm going to fast forward to the finding, which was that it's the combination of the two that is the most powerful. So because Andy concluded that traditional theme advertising, so the repetition of relatively weak arguments creatively presented, does not influence product perceptions at the time that it's seen. However, it increases the likelihood of exploratory purchases, as in the out of interest one, later on in life. So again, he came to the conclusion that the advertising memories have a powerful influence on whether a product is felt to be good or bad competitively. Or else, and I finish here with it, when something is tried, when a product is tried, the chances that the advertised brand will be purchased increase, significantly increase.
Right.
So, if I'm getting that right, the sampling products, pairing it with or positioned messaging,
Yes,
is really powerful to get long-term
correct.
revenue
Yes,
conversion.
yes. And there's a it's linked to that, and I always remember it. It's not mine. Credit to Marc Ritson, but he talks about the fact that quality affects image, but then he says
Right.
image returns the favor, and affects our perception of reality, which is no different to our actual reality. So the two are connected very much, and so it's the same. It's the same thing with the expectations and the experiences.
Is there, I mean, with the perspective like pairing sampling and with messaging, is there a way, and maybe it's not related to pairing messaging and sampling, but is there a way to increase the purchase frequency of a brand by designing an experience? Maybe it's partly by the pairing, or maybe it's something else.
I think we've seen a lot of that, actually. We've seen a lot of that. It's businesses have been doing this quite a lot, but they were doing it to fight back to inflation. So they actually make the package smaller, and they try to get consumers to buy more frequently. So it's a tactic, and it's what is that? Shrinkflation, right? You reduce the size of the product, simply because
Keep the
you want to
price the
maintain
same,
its
but
price.
then,
But and
Right.
there is also, interestingly, there's also the skimpflation, which is you are who is it's Shep Hyken. You know, he's a customer service guru. He talks about it as if it's like customer service on diet. He says about skimflation, but you know, we know from research that we've done that consumers who have experienced skimflation, which is like, you know, you are reducing the quality of your product or service, again, to try and maintain your price. Consumers are actually planning, those who have experienced it, they are planning to either significantly reduce or completely drop that service or buying that product. So experience matters. So do associations, obviously, and that's how price becomes. I mean, unless you bring that in, price will be the single determinant of a consumer choice. So our advice to clients is not to try and get them to purchase more frequently by obviously doing any of these tactics, but to try and do what we said before, try and increase predisposition among all buyers, the heavy, the light, the not customers, the ones who will be the customers of the future. And that's how the purchase frequency will increase. In fact, actually, there is a study, we've done a study. So we, when was that? A couple of years ago, I think. So we found that higher affinity encourages repeat purchase, or else that repeat purchase levels varied significantly between brand buyers with above and below average affinity. Where affinity was high, if you had a higher affinity to a product, the percentage of buyers who repeated their purchase in the following 9 months doubled than those who had a lower affinity to these products.
So just trying to stitch a few ideas together that you were, so coming back to the beginning where we were talking about mental and physical availability, there's a general agreement there. Purchase frequency, like you can't buy something if you can't access it. So whether that's through mental or physical availability. But then I think that's one of the like base mechanisms for helping improve purchase frequency. But then on top of that, it sounds to me like the experience you create, if it's good, it creates a sort of trust within the product.
Absolutely.
That it's worth it. And then you seek that out maybe more often from what you're saying.
You increase your chances
on top of the mental and physical availability.
Correct.
So it's, the positive experience creates this affinity to the brand so that it's kind of like an amplifier or a multiplier.
Exactly. An amplifier. I like that. Yeah.
The way I'm hearing this, and it's going to tie into a question here, is like, we talked about the responsibility, right? And marketing is usually responsible for one element of this. But so much, you talked about 75% actually based on the experiential components of building that brand trust, etc. So should marketing teams be more involved in those brand experiences? And if so, like how can they be? Because usually they're separate departments. They live outside of the marketing discipline. But how would you
like product design,
like
as an example,
product design, customer service,
sales team, customer service,
exactly.
The first part of your question is quite straightforward. The second is tricky. The how is tricky, but we have a lot of data that shows an interesting paradox, right? There are very few brands that are fully harnessing their power to build experiences, because these experiences will drive brand value. And so let's say in the UK, maybe last year or the year before, it was only 4% of brands, a very low percentage, were felt to deliver an exceptional experience, the type of experience that can be a driver of brand value. But at the same time, we know exactly what you said before. You quoted the 75%. I'll tell you that from another part of the company, another set of studies, we figure out that the product and service experience ranked third most influential touch point, no matter the size of the brand or the age of the audience that we're looking at. So all the evidence points to that. They should be. Now the how is more complicated, because it depends on the sector, on the vertical, how well in the company a marketing team is integrated. But because all the evidence is loud and clear, experience plays a significant role in building brand equity. Marketers should try and, should definitely make it their mission to be in tune with how experience is created.
So there's a whole bunch of things I want to ask you, and as I'm looking at just as a precursor, we might need to bring you back on because I have 8 million questions about we haven't even got to the second article yet, but I'm so fascinated by this because it's important that, like, again, going back to this, 25% of the brand building is from 75% is from the experience. You've got this idea in marketing that brand building is about partially being consistent over time, right? And so for a company like Snickers, we were talking about earlier. Snickers, like you might just go through a checkout lane at the grocery store. I don't know if you even have that in the UK, but in Canada we do. Where
The impulse
you go
lane.
through the impulse lane as you're checking
Yes.
out.
No,
There's
we
all
do.
these
We do.
things you can buy and just grab.
Yeah.
I know they've like banned those in some places because it's like it's just purely gluttonous. But but I might see a chocolate bar, buy a chocolate bar, like no thought, no delay. It's there, and that's the
Yeah.
physical
Yeah.
availability part. There's other products, like if you're looking at buying a fleet of airplanes, like we used to work in the airline industry, that's probably a multi-year purchase cycle with all kinds of objections and whatnot. But the brand consistency, like Snickers, let's say, or Boeing, has to be consistent over time. I imagine the packaging and the ads, like they need to be consistent. There's this classic Tropicana example that happened.
Yeah.
But probably more so even as the experience needs to be consistent over time. Right? And is that...
That's a very fair point. That's a very fair. I mean, shortcuts are very important to how the brain works. And again, quoting Daniel Kahneman, he describes the human brain as mysterious and as a machine for jumping to conclusions. Now, arguably, distinctiveness is branding 101. It's one of the first rules of branding, that the consumers should know that you're you. It's you. And this is one of the things that Byron Sharp and the Irma Bass Institute have been galvanizing the industry to remember, right? So the distinctive assets are truly useful in creative work. You codify everything, you repeat it, and you get through to the distracted consumers, and all of us are these days. So in your Tropicana example, yeah, I think that's a striking case of that, because consumers were angry because they actually couldn't find it in stores, but it was there. It was there all along, but it was just camouflaged behind a vanilla facade. It didn't look like itself. It looked more like a store brand, a private label brand. So you shouldn't touch these codes. I think that's we've probably reached consensus on that. And if you were to do that, I mean, play with something else. Find something else to play. Just don't play with the codes, because it will likely not go well. And I think the rule is for decades. Wait for decades. Work hard on them, establish them first, and then potentially your successor, given that we're talking about decades, could think about refreshing them. But as we talk about this internally, just because we talk a lot about our theories, it doesn't mean that our clients know them by heart. No, you've got to keep reminding them. So it's the same thing for marketers. We should never forget that no one really cares, and no consumer pays any attention. So just because we've been sweating over something, months, consumers will still just glance at it, if so. Just resist the
they don't
temptation.
appreciate. I love that. They don't appreciate that I spent 15 hours in debates
Exactly.
whether it should be this font or that font.
Correct. Yes.
Mark, you'll probably remember the conversation we had with Roger Martin around this very thing. And I know his example was he was using a sports app. They went through a redesign, and it just made it hard for him to really want to like that application again. So he just eventually just dropped it and went to another thing, because his idea was like branding is a shortcut for the brain, right? So the moment that you start tampering with that, and you make it difficult then for the consumer or the experience now, then it becomes a friction point. So, and it's funny, like the Tropicana is a unique example, because a lot of its competitors were copying what their packaging looked like. And then they decided to go in a different direction, right? So I wonder, like over that time, if we had like numbers and what that actually looked like, what was the increase in potential in those other products. But yeah,
well, on that note too, like you and I've definitely talked about this, and Mary, you've probably seen a bunch of examples of this. But you get a new marketing leader in, and one of the of
Yeah.
any organization. And one of the first things they want to do is rebrand.
Yes. I mean, that happens with anyone who gets a job, I think. And it's quite high up, you know, that puts their stamp on it. But yes, you're right about marketers. It often happens like that. Yeah.
Instead
Yeah.
of us
And it's our
thinking
job to advise them to, I suppose, have
not do
more.
it.
Yeah. I was going to say objective view on it, but leave the ego out of it.
You know, it's funny. And Mark and I have this notion that as marketers, we're simply a steward of the brand for a moment in time, and our job is literally just to kind of carry the torch for the 3, 5, 10 years that we
Yeah.
may be in an organization, and then pass
Mm.
it on to the next person and leave it in a better place potentially than we found it. But we can't think about it like our tenure should be defined by something like a rebrand, you know,
Yeah.
because it's not thinking about the longevity or thinking of all the work that's already gone in. It's thinking very myopically in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think as marketers, we have to really change that frame of mind and really be more of a steward or I'm just going to carry the torch for as long as I'm here versus me trying to reinvent the wheel in that same moment.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Very nicely put. Yeah.
Because the Tropicana thing is as you mentioned, an extreme example, but I mean, you have the potential of destroying the brand equity that we were talking about at the beginning was so important to defend and use.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that we because you said that and you mentioned equity, I'm going to say that, and because you're asking me, we shouldn't forget that all the brand associations you have for a brand come to you too, if you recognize it, obviously. So there are some the other side of things, or rather, the one that sits on top, the way I say it, the more slippery concepts of positive and negative associations that you have for a brand, what we call brand image. So because I'm part of this conversation, and I'm so much into, the Kantar theories on a daily basis, deep diving, I'll tell you that this intended brand image that the marketer hopes to achieve in the mind of the consumer ought to be, something more than just distinctive, ought to be, I would argue, meaningful and different. But only to mention here that in addition to the distinctive assets, it's brand differentiation that offers the opportunity for brands to go beyond the borders of just being easily recognized, and find product-based, experience-based, and even emotionally based differences. These are the type of differences that break through consumers' expectations of parity. But I'm only mentioning that because the word equity was mentioned. Yes, they need to be recognizable, but there's something more to it, we believe.
Well, you had on that note, perfect segue. You had the chart in your in this article about the how am I going to describe this? The influence of meaning, salience, and difference on picking a brand today versus picking a brand in a year from now. And those three factors, meaning, salience, and difference, don't have the same weighting for something today versus something from a year from now. Can you talk about that a bit and how that ties into the equity part you're just discussing?
Absolutely. First of all, credit to Jorge Alagon. So that's his table. It's just,
hey, Jorge.
Proudly stolen.
Say, well, we were saying hi to Jorge right now, but please.
But you know him, and I know him very
Graham,
well. It's one of our Kantar's brightest minds, actually. But he knows it's there, and he contributes massively to anything that I do. But we talk about value a lot, and this chart is it offers a very descriptive way of how you can grow a brand's value. This is what it is. So the first thing I would like to say is that a brand's value is compatible with its brand equity. So it's the power in the mind of the consumer that we've been talking about. And that power in the mind is revealed in their choices. So for us, equity is no longer an enigma. Brand equity It's not a mystical concept.
Mhm.
We have power metrics that are surrogate metrics for understanding and predict sales, and it all links to, let's maybe we can say it as a chorus now, to MDF, to our meaningfully different framework. It's a framework which helps you decipher whether you need to be moving the needle in being perceived as one, second, or the third. And we can talk about this now, but I know you've talked with me before, and Jorge Allen, but I'm going to say it. Okay, whether you're moving the needle in being perceived as meaningful, as in meeting people's needs, different as in being more unique, being the trendsetter in your category, and salient, if you are a brand that comes quickly to mind in a purchase situation. And you see, the question that this table answers is whether every lever, so every single one of these three dimensions, needs to contribute the most. I mean, whether each one of these levers contribute equally, and which one contributes the most to sales, and is there a difference between the present and the future? And the answer is, no to the first question. Not all levers equally contribute to sales. And the advice obviously varies. I mean, this is a typical makeup of brand growth now and in the future, but the advice that we give to clients obviously varies by category and market situation. And a salient brand, one that comes to mind easily, is more likely to be chosen now, presently.
Right.
Difference is not much of a contributor. Well, it is, but it's like 1/5 of the purchase decision relies on people thinking about whether brand is different or not, whether it's unique, whether it's setting trends. But to generate sales in a year's time, in a year from now, salience alone doesn't suffice. We call this often empty salience. So it's the brands that have excess meaningful difference over salience that are more likely to grow and be profitable in the future. This is what it says. This is what the chart says.
There's lots to chew on there. There's also, like, I was thinking about it in terms of this particular chart, in terms of Peter Field and Les Binet. Do you say Binet or Binet? Binet?
I think it's Binet.
Binet. Yes.
They're long and short of it, because they talk about the impacts of long and then the impacts of short. There's benefits on both. And to me, because of the timeline, it has similarities in my mind from what you're saying.
Exactly. No.
Yeah,
it's that time frame that makes the chart so special. Why your brand is big today, you can explain it with meaning and salience mostly. Why brands really grow, if you try to explain that with brand perception, mental availability, brand predisposition, is because they're being now meaningful and different. This is what it says. And this is how it connects to the short and the long term, to the now and the future.
So and linking it back to what we were talking about before, like a brand's equity partly is the combination of their expectation meeting the experience, and then doing that consistently over time. And so the power of choosing a brand today, if it comes to mind quickly and is good meaning, relevant meaning to me, then I'm going to pick that today. But then if I have a good experience that helps create that differentiation in the long term, it makes me think of it again when I come up into the purchase cycle for the next time.
Correct. And to use the word you used before, it amplifies the chances of being chosen.
Right. And it amplifies the recall of it.
Oh, yes.
At a later date. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
We're not going to get to that second article, man.
No, we're not. We'll have to do this again, Mary, but this is like so fascinating for me. I legitimately always struggled. I started out like 10 years ago. Be check me on this too, but thinking about everything had to be different, and that was the point of marketing. And then I've moved into mental and physical availability and distinctiveness over difference. And the part I was always unsure of is how experience, because it has to have some kind of impact on sales and revenue and brand building and all that kind of stuff. And designing experiences is the thing that marketers can be involved in. And I always struggle with fitting that into the model of mental and physical availability, because it's not apparent there. And so I find this so fascinating, because I feel like it's kind of bringing two worlds in my mind together.
Yeah, it's all linked.
And linking a few
nicely
things
together. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't say it, you said it's fascinating. I agree.
Yeah. Do you got anything else?
Well, we started with a wish.
Oh yeah.
I think we should end with a wish.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
What?
Well, is it just because it's a special year, and it has been a special year, can I ask for peace in the world instead? I mean, I just feel sometimes that there's some bigger things happening out there, and I mean, marketing is important and we love it, but I just think we can get the marketing thing fixed. It's okay to wait a little bit longer, right? I'm gonna go for peace this time, peace in the world.
Okay.
And hopefully, if we when we talk next, not if, I'm gonna be able. And you start with the same question. I'm gonna be able to say yes, my wish was granted.
Fair enough.
I think that's very fair. Very fair.
Yeah, that's good. Mary, really appreciate your time, and really appreciate the insights from
Same.
that you've been able to share with us from all of the work that's being done at Kantar. So I appreciate all that. Thank you.
Yeah, I love speaking to you, and I loved our dialogue. I really did. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, it's been super fun. Like so insightful and thoughtful, and like just so much to chew on. But yeah, appreciate your time.
And I loved even the short bit we did in Greek. Maybe we should, every time we do it, we increase it, right?
We'll start increasing it.
We're going to work on our Greek audience.
Gradually, everyone will be fluent. One day we'll replace English. The English
yeah,
language.
we should do an offshoot of like Greek with Mary and V.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Time for the post-pod discussion with Marc and V.
You go.
Mary's back again. Tell a friend. Post-pod. Let's do this. How'd that go?
I thought great. Really good. Way better than I could have done.
Oh man.
I did have the song overplaying in my head as I recognized it's a distinctive asset.
See?
The song, soundtrack. Yeah. Well done, V.
Thanks, man. Well, what can I say? First of all, we got Mary back. And we had an agenda to talk about a whole lot of stuff, and we didn't even get through everything that we wanted, unfortunately.
Yeah. You know what though? Like I'm okay with, not that I wanted to force the agenda and like just get through for the sake of asking the questions, but there's just honestly, like we talked about it a bit towards the end there. There's so much about experience that I don't think about nearly enough. And we had a moment to talk to her about it. And I just feel like, given all the research and insights that they have around experience and how that creates meaning and how that creates difference, it's just interesting to have the chance to pick her brain on that kind of stuff.
Man, I have 3 pages of notes here. I was just trying to like feverishly write down everything that she was saying, and there's a few things that stood out, and it kind of came up in the interview as well. But when we think about brands And as marketers, like we're hyper focused on the ads, making sure like they're spot on. But the reality is when it's only 25%
Mm-hmm.
accountable for the total brand experience and
Mm-hmm.
75 is coming from all the experience touch points,
Mm-hmm.
it shows you that, I don't know, if you were to say, let's just focus on that 75%
Mm-hmm.
and the 25% we had to cut at any given time
Mm-hmm.
because recession, because of whatever, brands could still live. And that's kind of a scary thought to me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that ads maybe played a larger role. But if it is only 25%, maybe I don't want to say there's merit to them constantly cutting our budgets. If everything else is checked off the right way,
Mm-hmm.
it, I don't know, man, I struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so we were talking about Disney as an example.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a few things when we talk about the role of marketer, and I love your line of questions. Always kind of comes like, where does things fit in the marketing operation or within the business, like branding?
Yeah.
You know, I love those kind of questions because it's forcing me to think differently and bigger than just say the promotional P. If you think about pricing, product, and place as
Yeah.
part of the marketer's scope,
Yeah.
then there's a huge opportunity, even if there's a reduction in budget, for a marketer to create impact within an organization beyond the ads we run, because it's one of the 4 P's. It's not the only thing we do. And then in thinking about Disney, like I literally was like in this lineup for an hour and a half, and there's this one part in I think it was Peter Pan's Peter Pan adventure, whatever that ride was. But you go through this lineup part, and there's a section where it's like a waiting room. Like it's not just a straight line, right?
Right.
There's like all these different areas that you go into, and there's different experiences within the rooms. But there's one particular room that you spend a fair bit of time in, and there's like this shadow that's being cast over this wall, and then you can see Tinkerbell flying around and stuff.
Yeah.
But you can play with bells that are shadows. And so there's a bell that pops up, and you can, with your shadow, hit the bell and it will make a noise, or you can hold your hand out and some butterflies will fly and land on the shadow of your hand and things like that. So kids are just like mind blown. This is amazing.
Of course.
Even me, I was like, this is amazing. But
I'd be amazed.
but even that, and then I started thinking about that as an experience, and it creates a brand experience. So then I was thinking about that and how it applies to like just benign things that you can just ignore all the time. Like, what is our sales process? What is our customer service
Exactly.
process? Like, how do we take that idea of, while people are waiting, entertaining them or providing them with extra value, so that it's not just the straight process. Like you can design all kinds of experiences to brand an organization, and I think there's a role for marketers there too.
Yeah, and I think that's where my mind went. And I know, like off camera, we had just a quick conversation, with Mary around like, well, the idea of like decentralized marketing versus a centralized marketing function, and whatnot. If a marketing department in an organization is literally only responsible for campaigns, go to market, ads, etc., I could see how quickly that discipline could be marginalized. If, however, a marketing department has more eminence across some of those other experience touch points, call it, sales, the service, the what's another good one we could use? The product itself.
Sure.
Because remember, marketing should be the customer voice internally, right? So it should have a way to kind of impact. Then all of a sudden, the marketer's job is a lot larger than it is just simply pumping out ads. So then if there is a decrease in budget, that doesn't mean you can't still have an impact to the organization and the brand.
Right.
But all too often, a lot of these structures are very, I don't want to use the word myopic, but just very
siloed almost.
Oh, yeah, siloed.
Responsibilities.
Exactly. The responsibilities are siloed, which doesn't allow for that end-to-end maybe management or impact. that then all of a sudden a marketer may feel marginalized because, hey, you don't trust marketing because you cut my budget again. But in that moment, like a marketer can be thinking bigger. It's like, well, I can still impact the brand differently. And I don't think we do that. And it comes back to structure though, and I don't think we're set up to do that the right way. And that goes back to our last year's conversation. Where does brand live? Oh, sorry, the podcast, like, what is it? Who owns it? I'm still a big believer that brand in of itself needs to live outside of marketing, right? It's like the brand, and it's like all the customer touch points, and the ability to market the actual thing. But then that's how you kind of future-proof a team as well, because now you're looking at multiple end-to-end touch points to help impact that. So anyways, my mind was going a mile a minute as she was going through a lot of this stuff. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is like the chart itself. And I know we're doing video now, so we can kind of use our hand gestures and everything.
Maybe we can figure out how to put this chart in as a link or something like that. But
yeah, but like the meaningful. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go.
No, I was just gonna say maybe we can even figure out a way to do it, like show it on the video. That would be next level.
If there's any video out there, video editors out there would love to help us out with all this. We don't have money. Just raise your hand. This is just for fun. But honestly, like when you think about like their meaningful difference network and have the meaning, salience, and difference, and then their impact on purchasing a product today, what was it? Like 40% is attributed to it being meaningful, 40% was it being salient, and then 20% was it being different. But that same product, if you're buying in a year, the numbers change drastically, where you have the meaningful jumps from 40 to 45. The salience drops to 10%. So it's not as important in a year, but that's where your difference makes up the difference. Well, your difference makes up the difference, but it jumps to 45%. So I think, again, thinking about the longevity and the way you're marketing it and the way you're thinking about it, there's probably 2 out of the 3 things where you have to be more focused on, especially in the long term versus the short term. And that's where sales and salience, become very myopic because it's in that moment, right? So that's the discounting effect. And it's why it probably works.
Never done this yet.
You think this is going to work?
I don't know. It looks like it's working to me. We have officially shared a screen.
This is amazing. Okay.
If this works, then I'm going to be super excited. We have so many other options now.
Oh, no kidding.
This is going to be great.
So obviously the visual does a lot better way than me describing it.
Well, I think you did great.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm with you. Like there's just a lot of interesting elements to consider in terms of like creating value from an organization's perspective, from the marketing department. There's a formula that I think you and I've talked about before, but the one that I like thinking about a lot is value equals benefit minus cost. So you can increase value by cutting costs, or you can increase benefit, or some combination thereof. And so, I think from an organizational perspective, you could think about improving marketing's value by decreasing their budgets, which cuts costs. But from a marketer's perspective, you could look at that and go, well, how do I increase the benefits I'm providing to the organization? And things like whether the company does it or not, I don't know. But Mary talked about a little bit that brand gap of what expectations are you setting into the mind of the customers, and then what are you actually delivering against? And I don't know if that is being measured often by a lot of organizations, but there are studies out there, and it oftentimes looks like a punchline.
Yeah.
80% of people we ask in an organization think they deliver great brand experience. 5% of customers agree. You know what I mean? Like there's often this massive disconnect. And so I think there's from a marketer's perspective, you can look at a chart like that and think about how do we close the gap? And then instantly you're thinking about different ways to create value outside of just an ad budget.
I agree. And again, this is changing the way we think about, structures in the way that the role of the marketer in an organization. But if we do a better job, in my opinion at least, in showing our value across the other areas as well to help build those experiences, then I would argue you may have an easier time making a case for budget, because now it's like it helps build the frequency, it helps build the mental availability. Like, it has so many downstream effects on the experience that you're trying to build across in store, if we're using a bricks and mortar example, for instance. And because now your values outside of just like driving a campaign.
Totally.
And I think all too often we just stay in that space, and that's how we become the coloring department.
Totally. Yeah, super interesting. And the other thing, my last sort of not last, but the last I'll talk about here, was just that the importance of being consistent, not just on the brand perspective, like in terms of distinctive assets you're building.
Yeah.
Though I think that is really important, like crucially important, but also thinking about it from an experience perspective as well. Just the consistency of having great experiences and pairing that with recognizable distinctive assets over time can be a way to create differentiation without it having any different product. Like, you can sell the same shoes as I can, but we can have a completely different experience. Like Zappos is always the thing I think of when it comes to that. They completely differentiated themselves on customer service as opposed to, say, Amazon or any other retailer.
Well, it's funny, like our shared experience in retail, how did we differentiate ourselves from like the Amazons or some of the other retailers that sold the same shoes? It was the experience that they're trying to create in stores as well, right? The digitization of the stores, if you recall. Maybe we went too far with some of it and it wasn't actually useful, but it did create a different experience for the consumer walking in through those doors. So I think like the experiential retail, or in that case, there is a huge validity of it, and that's why, like, research and development, you should constantly be looking at that. And then obviously, like, if we go back to Tom's conversation that we had like late last year, like, don't be blinded by the trends that you're seeing. Like, don't think about the metaverse right now. Like, think about other ways you can genuinely create experiences with your consumers today with the technology that exists today. Like, don't at least in my opinion, and I don't want to say like don't invest in technology, it does make sense to stay curious about it. Like, for me, stay close to the metaverse. Don't overinvest there yet, because I'm sure there's other areas in the organization you can probably be focusing that attention to. But I don't want to say it's not difficult, man. Like, even with Andrea, we were talking about like customer centricity. It's not hard. Just put the voice of the guest or the voice of the customer in your organization.
Totally. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was a good conversation, V. Yeah, man. I'm glad we did that.
This is
we'll probably have to break around again because we didn't get to the second half.
I want to get to like the performance branding element, really genuinely, because I think that's an incredible, not only will it be an incredible conversation, but it's another way of reframing the idea of branding, be more performance oriented. Like, it's
agreed.
Anyways, Mary, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And V, adieu.
Adieu, my friend. This is it's been a slice.
Good. Chat soon.
Sounds good. Have a good day. Ciao.